Hey, I got it. All righty. Thank you all for tuning in. What I'm going to do is kind of go through a series of slides, more or less talking about how I went about preparing a picture postcard exhibit these many years ago, probably 12, 13, 14 years ago when the winter show, the Maristamp Expo, held their first exhibition as a trial for to get APS accreditation. I forget where it was. I think it was at Norfolk, I believe, but I don't recall. There were about 8 or 9 exhibits there, and we tried it out, and eventually the APS accepted it, though there was a lot of gnashing of teeth. In any way, the picture postcards exhibiting for the gold. This was done in conjunction with the American Association of Philatelic Exhibitors, and the AAPE, particularly in the 15 to 20 years ago, was integral in the multitude of changes that have gone on in exhibiting, the classes, the different criteria, and the judging of all of our exhibits over the last 15 years. And it was, in my opinion, it was a true watershed for both judging. I think it improved the judges, and it made exhibiting have a focus and a goal and became fun. And I think it also gave an interest to the viewing audience. You know, a viewing audience isn't particularly all that interested when they start at the end of an exhibit and walk past it to the front. But if they start actually looking and reading at exhibits, and that was kind of the idea of when we started picture postcards some 19 years ago, 18 years ago, I think. So what are picture postcards? This is the definition that we came up with a number of years ago, and it's any sort of mailable item, regardless of what's on the front. It used to be in the old days, it was leather, it was wood, it was whatever they could get by through the post office, and produced by private entities, usually designed to be sent through the post. I mean, that's the relationship of picture postcards with philately, is that they were meant to be mailed with messages. For clarity here, we have designated that anything that are printed to private order or a stamp to order done by an issuing government body. So a PTPO is a postal stationery item where a private company has put an image on it, or the stamp to order, somebody has sent the pictures over to the postal agency and they have imprinted stamps on it. So here's an example of some private cards. The one on the left, the top left, were the Canadian Railroad cards that were printed in the teens, 110 years ago, for the publicity of the Canadian Railway. And the one on the right is one of them, if anybody knows anything about Southern African philately and picture postcards, a Salo Epstein item that he started back in the late 90s, and produced quite a few images on the stationery of the Transvaal. The government cards, of course, they've gotten involved in it. This is another Canadian card that was issued to show the fishing flies with an image on the front. Unfortunately, it's not particularly a good triple concordance for all the people that do the maxi cards, but that's okay. They don't care. They just sold them and made money. This is another printed to private order card issued by in the Argentine government, again, promoting trout fishing in Argentina. And by the way, it's worth going to fish there if you have an inkling to catch browns, huge browns or rainbows. Lovely fishing. So exhibiting picture postcards is pretty much like anything else that you want to exhibit. You know, as well, I'll be kind of elementary on this, but you got to choose your subject. You have to choose the story, which again is like any sort of thematically oriented exhibit. is one of the most important things you can do. Got to choose your material, because that's going to count, because these picture postcard exhibits are judged in the United States like any other exhibit. So it's treatment, knowledge, condition, rarity, and presentation. Choose your write-up. That's important to let the judge know what you know about your subject and your material. And choose your page layout. Now, choosing your subject, the title becomes very important, just like any other exhibit. The title should explain what it is that you're trying to do. And the beauty about picture postcards is there's almost an infinite number of subject types you can get into. It can be topical, it can be a geographical or topographical, historical. There have been many exhibits that have come out. There was one on that went through the War of Independence in Ireland. There was one topographical. There was an exhibit that did On the Yard, which was a picture postcard exhibit of the military academy. Narrative, there was an exhibit in South Africa where somebody had a whole correspondence of somebody that had gone to Victoria Falls and back on the train. And it was literally a diary using picture postcards to show what the trip was like. And by class, you can do by artists, photographers, formats. Liz Heisey has done one by specific artists who love to do exaggerations. So here's a topical. So this would be like fishing. You could discuss trout fishing in a particular area, or you can go through exaggeration. Although, based upon my experience of fishing for trout, this is not an exaggeration. It's pretty true. Actually, that's me on the left there. Geographical, you could do a topic on owl drugstores and all the different drugstores that were done in the Pacific Northwest in California in the early 20th century. Advertising slogans, here's a dual subject. You can on shell advertising, or you can do Smokey the Bear and have only you can prevent forest fires. Here's a class where we're dealing with Winch, who was a very famous artist in the early 20th century, and his material is quite sought after. Here's another one. This happens to be Whitney Publishing Company. Again, this was a Halloween or an owl subject. So treatment, it's always a story. So how do you get to your basic story? If you're wise, you put an outline of exactly how you want the story to progress. So if you do it in an outline form or like a thematic form where you've got the subjects based upon a hierarchy of subsections, you've got a beginning and middle and end. Must be logical and have flow. It's got to make sense. And each page and each card relates to and advances the story. So many people look at their material, whether it's philatelic, or whether it's stamps, whether it's postal history, or anything else. What you own are your little children. And sometimes it's best to leave a lot of your children at home on the dining room table and not put stuff in the exhibit. If it doesn't advance the story, leave it at home. So choosing your material. You want to choose the material that best develops your story. And by choosing the proper material, you show implied knowledge of your subject. And again, we'll get into this when we get into the knowledge section of picture postcards. You know the broad universe of your material, and it's just like a thematic exhibit or a display exhibit. What you choose to explain a specific point within your story shows your knowledge. And the best material, of course, shows challenge. The most difficult to acquire or challenging material or the best condition and the best quality of the material as well. So knowledge of subject. So in the United States, it's more or less like we've done for thematic exhibits as well as display exhibits. We divided knowledge up into two sections. One is knowledge of the subject you've chosen to develop, and the other, of course, is either the philatelic knowledge in the case of thematic or display, or in the case of picture postcards, the deltiological knowledge that you're going to show. So treatment of the subject and the discussion of the story, information not readily available to the public. So if you're doing a particular a thematic subject, you want to, just like a thematic exhibit, a topical subject needs to be dealt with the knowledge that most people aren't going to, they're reading what you've written down on the page, and they're going to be educated a little bit or a lot. And the knowledge of the card, or the deltiological knowledge, display information over and above the obvious. This is a colored picture postcard used and blah, blah, blah. No, what you want to show is the information that the people aren't going to know. When was the area, when was the time period that these things were produced? Is it part of a series? What is the method of production? As well as using your own personal experience, because as we'll get into, this knowledge about deltology is not widely publicized. It's not widely printed. It's not widely known. So if there's no information available, you can just make estimates based upon your own personal experience. So your page layout, does it catch the eye of the viewer? Is it balanced on the pages and the frame? Is the presentation appealing and not slapdash or messy? And does it command attention? Does it show creativity? So, as I said before, the same unified exhibit, or what we call now the exhibit evaluation form, as for all other adult classes. The only class that we do not use the EEF is youth and literature. But it's just like any other exhibit. It's the big five, as we call it. Okay, I want to emphasize that. So challenges of the exhibit. This is the good news and bad news. The good news is there's almost an infinite number of subjects that you can choose. That's the good news. The bad news is there's an infinite number of subjects, and it's going to be very difficult to arrange it into your own story. Lots of exhibits, philatelic exhibits we deal with, the treatment is almost preset, whereas the treatment and the development of a picture postcard exhibit is not set. It's, again, to develop a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end, but it isn't to say you got your pre-production material, your proofs, your essays, and your printing errors, and your stamps and their uses. Well, that's a traditional exhibit, but this is a lot different. Much less, references are much less than philatelic. In fact, if you have any sort of philatelic references about the subject you've got with regard deltiological references, you're lucky. And baseline for stories, you can do anything you want to. So the burden is on the exhibitor to establish the treatment. I said, it's almost infinite and it's unorganized. So the treatment, just like anything else, the title page, how well is it defined, and the scope of the outline of the story? Is it clear? Do you know by reading the title page, or the title and then the title page, do you know what you're going to see in the exhibit? And that allows the judge to be able to evaluate what you said you're going to do. And is there a challenge? Did you do what you said you were going to do? Does he show knowledge? Okay, development of the story is well developed per title. Does the story have a start and an end? Is it well covered? An exhibit limits based upon subject or theme, and it's not a collection. Here's my postcards of Omaha, Nebraska by publisher. That's not much of a story, so your treatment is going to suffer. So here's an example of a title page, and for the life of me, I was trying to think of who this exhibitor is, but he did the circus, I think. Colin. Anyway, he did a great. I'm sorry.
Roland Essig.
Thank you very much. That's who this is from, and he did the history of steamers in the Great Lakes, and it was a marvelous exhibit. It was very well done. This is Phil Steger. This was a one-frame exhibit. He's quite a palm person. He grows palms for a hobby, and this was a one-frame exhibit about the royal palm. This happens to be my exhibit. This was done in a slightly different manner. Instead of a historical or a topical, this is actually done as, I'm taking you to Bloemfontein circa 1905, 1910, and I'm going to give you a tour and give you a history and show you around. And you can't read it, but this shows you kind of what I was trying to do, and showing you the main sites of the small town of Bloemfontein around the turn of the 20th century. So research and knowledge. So you got the subject. Explicit knowledge displayed by the write-up of the material chosen to develop the story. And the research is going to be shown of what sort of knowledge you have gained through your research in the write-up. Lots of people have stolen from thematic exhibits the 2 or 3 tiered font avenue of showing subject knowledge versus deltiological knowledge by using different fonts or different colors. It's a personal thing. And the write-up should be brief enough to be understood, and yet give it enough interest that you can follow it and may want to read what's written there. So here's subject knowledge. This is an example out of my exhibit. This is a ratty card. Yes, it is, but it's the only one I've seen of this particular one. I tell you the story, the history of the president's residency. So this is the subject knowledge, as if I'm giving you a tour of Bloemfontein. And I'm also, this guy's going to give me a cut of anything you buy from F. Shaw's grocery store or cyclery shop. But this is actually a scan from an advertisement from a turn of the century publication. And I'm also giving you some information of where we are looking at Maitland Street and what the various other things. This is the post office. So this is a write-up showing subject knowledge and also showing research, because I had to go into some old documents to find out about F. Shaw and what he did. Now we get to the deltiological knowledge. And this is something I think we do a little different, and I don't know how my predecessor last week talked about the cards. I know that in my experience overseas, and by seeing overseas picture postcard exhibits here, they don't spend enough time and energy on the displaying the deltiological knowledge. And that's like saying, well, I'm not going to tell you what the rate is because maybe I don't know, or in the case of Markophily, you're not telling me the range that this particular postal market was used and what towns they were used. That's the meat of the other half of research and knowledge, is what do you know about the cards? It shows the write-up in the cards. And again, publisher, printer, series, date issued, et cetera, where possible. So if you just go out and put together a picture postcard exhibit by trying to pick up 400 cards in 6 months and put an exhibit together, you're probably not going to have much of this knowledge. If you're a serious collector of a particular area, so I've been collecting picture postcards of the Free State and Transvaal for 35 years, and I know what the universe is out there, and I know when I see a card that I've never seen before, or I have enough cards that I can tell you that the series appears to be from 630 to number 636 to 648. So it's a series of 12 cards, et cetera, et cetera. And the printer did this many, and you can tell by when they were used. Succinct and direct, don't state the obvious. Again, this is a color postcard, and it was used at such and such a date. You only use that information where it's germane to the deltiological knowledge, or it directly relates to the subject knowledge. Postal history is not important, again, unless it specifically relates to your subject. So if you're dealing with the development of the postcards of Salo Epstein, and you have some of his mailing envelopes when he was mailing cards to people who were buying them from him, or an advertising postcard showing Salo was in his business, that could be germane in the development of your subject. But generally speaking, except for when the card was issued, the dates and the postal history is not important. So here's an example of Barlow Brothers, the divided back, and I just give a little discussion about the history of the Barlow Brothers printing and their history. The card varieties, this again is a deltiological knowledge. These are both by Deal Brothers, and these are different printings, and you can tell by the difference in the font and location of the numbers. And then in the back, it could be germane in this particular case. This shows that Borkenhagen originally printed these cards, and then after Borkenhagen sold his business, the guy who bought the business still had this stock, and he didn't want to advertise somebody that wasn't around anymore, so they printed this X out. So that's kind of, again, that's a deltiological. It's a variety of a postmark or a machine postmark. You're showing details. Date of use, not important unless associated with when the cards were produced. Card number useful if it's related to a series or dates of production. And divided backs are only relevant as it relates to the specific country you're dealing with. Divided backs were up until 2004 in Southern Africa. It's different. It varies from country to country, whether it's Europe or North America. But that's relevant to give you information on when these things were produced. So use of card numbers, here's an example. Were issued simultaneously sepia and color cards. The series are numbered 658 to 698, and only for Bloemfontein and Chibi and Company only did Bloemfontein cards, not the rest of the Free State. So this is, again, deltiological information. Nobody cares, but it shows you have done your research and you're showing knowledge. This is more for either the person who's collecting the stuff or the judge to know that you do have some research and knowledge and background. So here's use of divided back data. These are both divided backs. Here's this residency card. And it gives you an idea when these were produced. You may not have, I don't have this one used, so I don't know. Unknown publisher, but it was published because it's an undivided back, so it has to be before 1904. Okay. As the choice subject is limited, available published and references to the printers and publishers are also limited. Is limited. So subject is limited, limitless. The amount of information you can get is limited. The challenge is pertaining both subject and deltiological knowledge. So here, Mr. Phelps, this is your mission impossible if you choose to accept it. Rarity. This is the most thorny subject in picture postcards. There ain't no catalog. You have to tell the judge. Now, the judges can either accept your assessment or he can laugh at you, particularly if he knows the subject, you may be in trouble, but you have to accept the judges. Highlighting the items, a frequency of survival versus number printed needs to be considered, and your personal observation. So in my case, I've been collecting this stuff for 35 years, and this is the only one I've ever seen. Which means they may, particularly in real photos, these may be one-offs. So in rarity, in this case, there are probably thousands of these produced. Interior, as a rule of thumb, interior views are more scarce or more challenging to find. Modern cards need to be almost free from faults. Used cards shouldn't have ink from the cancels, offsets, and distract from pictures. Rare cards can be accepted. It's the only one you've ever seen, and it's important for telling the story. And they may, particularly pre-1910, there may be a lot of message written around the face of the card. If you could only put the address on the back, expect to have some writing on the face. So here's an example. This was the Parliament buildings burned down, and as you see, this is the dog ate my homework. Well, this was a personally printed photograph, and it's the only one I've ever seen, and it probably is one off. And it is kind of dramatic, showing the Parliament building being burned down, the Radsdal being burned down. Okay, presentation, overlapping, permitted if important aspects are not hidden. Layout write-up, neat and clear. Creativity, this goes to maybe using 11 and a half by 17. Creativity would be rewarded, and presentation should not distract from the card. So using all sorts of fancy colored inks and wonderful font and beautiful calligraphy, that's all fine and dandy if you're doing a wedding invitation, but I think for an exhibit, it just detracts from what you're trying to do and the material you're presenting. And they should stand out and encourage the viewer's attention. Because as Yoram was saying, I mean, people like to look at picture postcard exhibits. Our class, our stuff was, I stole it from Australia and South Africa, and I brought it here, presented it to the Canage, and they told me to make up a point score sheet, which I did using South Africa and New Zealand and Australia. We went with that for quite a while, and then we said, why should we have all this different stuff? Let's just incorporate it into the basics of judging exhibits. So why I freely admit that I stole ideas from South Africa and Australia. What we have here, I think, is a little different than what they do over there. They do, as we were talking about, they penalize you for overlapping the cards, and they do not put as much importance. I know the Europeans that I've seen with the European exhibits I have, they've been downgraded here because they don't show a lot of deltological knowledge. They don't discuss the cards per se. So, pays your money, takes your chances. Anytime you go into FIP and you get accolades and ribbons and medals and everything here, and you go to FIP and they rip you apart, that's the way it happens. And conversely, some people that do well overseas and bring them here, they might find our judges are Judge Roy Beans. If you show overseas, expect differences not different from other classes. So and Phil had his over there and he got whacked. And this is a page from mine where I got whacked. And I'm not really hiding anything. It just, I didn't have a printer that could do the 11 and a half by 17. So that's what you see is what I had. I'm cheap. So anyway, that's me. Oh, that's about 30 minutes. My goodness. Not bad for 40 slides. Any questions?
So if everybody wants to unmute themselves and speak up and ask questions of Tim, Tim's shoulders are broad. He can certainly think on his feet and answer any questions you may have. Yes,
I must say I was president of AAPE during this rather turbulent time period, and you can't believe how much grief and how broad my shoulders and strong my back had to be for about 5 or 8 years, particularly when we were introducing point scoring and judges not happy with having to do extra work and exhibitors wondering how come I didn't get 100 on a one frame exhibit. And anyway, So I can deal with Rotten Tomatoes, and just don't make them rocks, please.
So, Tim, a naive question, perhaps. You said postal history doesn't matter. So, no need to refer to rates, no need to refer to destinations, no need to refer to all those things that in postal history we obsess about.
And again, it's the footnote that I said, now this is my opinion. If the postal history is relevant to the subject and it directly relates and develops to the story you're trying to show, that's one thing. And again, you use the dates of use to show when these were published or printed. But saying used in such and such a town, going to such and such a town, with an auxiliary marking of postage due, what does that have to do with trout fishing in Pennsylvania? I don't know. So that's what I've always said. It's not that we don't care about what's on the other side. We do care about what's on the other side, particularly as it relates to the printing and publication of the card. But postal history is not what we're trying to judge. You notice it's subject knowledge and deltiological knowledge. There isn't philatelic knowledge. So that would be my answer to that. And I'm more than willing to discuss that with anybody. I mean, sure, if somebody wants to say something because they really think it's neat, that's fine. But I wouldn't make a habit of it in a 4 or 5 frame exhibit. You know, you can do 1 or 2 things, but not postal history as the founding flow of the subject.
Now, if the stamp is torn off the card, it's on the back, it's not the whole corner of the card, does that matter?
I can tell you that when you get collections of picture postcards, this is stuff's coming from 1905, 1910. Who was collecting what back then? It was stamps. So just like postal history items, they cut the corners off of wonderful registered covers from 1878 to take the stamps. Now, wouldn't you kill to have a registered cover from the Free State in 1878? Yes, you would. So everybody was trying to either soak them off or tear them off. And you'll see stamps removed from 10 to 30% of the postal cards. It has nothing to do with it unless it harms the front of the cover.
Right. So, Yoram, how does this compare with showing postcards in Israel?
I'm not sure. I don't think we have very organized system here. We're just trying to learn from what people do. Normally, we follow FIP rules. So, for example, we wouldn't overlap postcards.
Okay, is that an FIP rule? I haven't read the FIP rules for printed postcards.
To be honest, I don't know if it's an FIP rule, but it's a comment I've heard from FIP judges. One of the drawbacks, and that goes back to the original discussion we had before the presentation, if you use, let's say, a 16-page frame, then you have normally 2 postcards per page. Maybe sometimes you can squeeze in 3, but then the wording needs to be very minimal. If you go to 3 pages in one row, then it's impossible in 3 pages to put 2 horizontal postcards one next to the other. So normally you wouldn't get much of doing 3 pages. You do a 3-page, then you can play a little more with the presentation and be more creative.
Yeah, or 2 pages per per.
Yeah, A3, I'm sorry, is like
Yeah,
two.
well, some people use 11 and a half by 14s or 13s. Isn't that right? I think that's right.
11 by 17.
Well, 11 by 17 is the double
Yeah.
A2. Some people use they use 3 pages per row. I think it's 11 and a half by 13 or no, eight and a half by 13, I think, or 14, whatever the number is for 36 inches across. I can't add math. So
Yeah, but if you do three per row, 1/3 of the 36. I'm
yeah, 12 inches.
confused
Yeah.
with the inches dimensions, but on 1/3, it's very difficult to get 2 postcards, horizontal postcards, one next to the other. So
Particularly the European size postcards. Yeah.
yeah, so you can't really be creative there and get more, shall we say, more postcards into the same real estate area. I don't know.
And again,
So Tim,
go
sorry.
ahead.
So
Right.
another dumb question. In your Bloemfontein exhibit, you show a tremendous amount of deltiological knowledge. Where did you find out the information? Where did you find out about the companies? Where did you find out about, all the details? Can you give us like an idiot's guide of where to look?
Well, dare I say, and this isn't an advertisement, but Google is one. There was a South African picture postcard research group, I think is what it was called, and that was founded out of Australia, UK, and South Africa. It was a group of collectors, and they had done some research in going into the archives, like in South Africa, Pretoria, Joburg, or where, Cape Town. And they found some of the old information of the old publishers, and they actually published some of that data in their publication. They died 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, but it was a wonderful little group. And and people got old and people got tired of doing the work, and it just died. But that was where I got some of that. Google is another, and then just simply having probably 1,500 picture postcards of the Free State, and then there was a guy by the name of, now I can't remember his name, but he did specifically for South Africa, he did a catalog of what he knew, with people helping him, of all the major publishers, and the numbers used for either the numbered printing number of the card, or of the negative used, like in Solo Epstein, for example, or Valentine. And he did that for the major. I think there was 5 or 6 books he did, spiral bound books that you could order from like $10 a piece. So that gave you an idea of what the titles were and the subjects were and the numbers, so you could look and see the range of numbers that you could put down. But it wasn't really, the printing process, and he did this and he did that. It just, you've got to really dig. And it helps having old publication. Oh, go ahead.
Tim, is that the Nicholson listings that you?
Yes, that's who it is. Yeah, that is. And I'm such a horrible with names, obviously. But yeah, that was Nicholson's deal, and it's online.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, so you can get it, but that only relates to Southern Africa.
Yes.
The Rhodesian Study Circle has done an outstanding job of listing all the picture postcards related to Rhodesia. They've done that over the past 7 or 8 years. So there are, and I'm sure there are other lists that people have done, particularly in the last couple of decades. But you got to look for them.
Yeah, you do.
I think that you said the South African research group died. I think they also had like a postcard club, and I think that also unfortunately closed too.
Yeah, it did. Mm.
I mean, and it's funny because the clubs have faded away, yet the interest in postcards has kind of continued to blossom. I guess the postcard collectors are generally more solitary or don't have the same interest in the social side that the stamp collectors do.
Well, up until 15 years ago, they were virtually excluded. They had, it was the Austin show, I believe, down in Texas. They had an annual show that was stamps and picture postcards. And once again, I went down and judged that, I think in 2003, and they had these boards stuck up for picture postcards, as well as the normal frames that they had stamp exhibits in. And that's where I got the idea, because half the dealers were postcard dealers. And I went, wow, we're always looking for dealers to occupy spaces, butts in seats, and to pay for, of course, picture postcard dealers won't pay what stamp dealers will. But that show died again because of interest in people volunteering. But that was the first, that was the only show I've ever seen that really married. They called it a stamp and postcard show. And they had exhibits of both at that show in Austin.
Well,
So
Milcopex is trying to recreate that, maybe. Although you in Denver, I don't know if that. Remember, you had the adjacent room this year.
Yeah.
Now, they were ephemera or they were postcards. I'm trying to remember.
It was mostly postcards. There is some paper over there, but it's predominantly postcards. So a woman who is a postcard dealer, she is kind of joined up with the Rompex committee, and we've kind of held each other's rah-rah banner and tried to promote both shows. And we do get a little flow over back and forth, and it can't hurt. So it is, even though it is simultaneous, what she charges for tables is about 1/5 of what we charge for tables, but maybe they've got a better deal than we do. I don't know.
Yeah.
Here
Sorry, go ahead.
No, thanks. Here in South Africa, the postcard category at the exhibits is a very, very small proportion of the amount of exhibits that are put up.
Yeah.
We have the category in every exhibit, every exhibition, but it's a fraction of what all the other categories.
Yeah, when I judged at Pretoria, I think that was 17 or 18.
It was 2018. I remember that.
It was 18. Yeah. There was I think there were 3 or 2 at least, and then 1 or 2 other. Well, it would be Paul Van Zel's, his display exhibits, which have picture postcards and
Yes,
stuff, and
yeah.
But you're right. I don't know why, because South Africa really was kind of one of the innovators of picture postcards back in the mid to late 90s. So I don't know. You never know, and just getting people off the dime, but they're solitary because I don't know that there's just. It's difficult to get people, and since we didn't start exhibiting until about 06.
Yeah. Anyway, we at our national next month. I'm exhibiting some of my postcards. So
Good.
We'll see.
What's the subject? What's the subject?
It's the postcards of Queen Mary's doll's house at Windsor Castle.
Oh, okay.
It's mainly the main bulk of the cards will be from the sets published by Raphael Tuck. But I'm also then enlarging on the background to it all, and who Queen Mary was, and Windsor Castle, and all the rest. So,
well, that's interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. It's a topical subject with a historical background. You develop it historically into a topical theme.
Yeah.
that's the beauty of picture postcards. You can make any sort of, like display, you can make any sort of story you want to and use any kind of stuff. Well, you could even, I think you can even use display material in a picture postcard exhibit within limits. If you stick something in there that isn't a picture postcard, nobody's gonna, let me rephrase that. A good judge is not going to assassinate you for it.
Okay, well, I'm going to try it. So there'll be one or two pieces in that aren't picture postcards, but that will relate to the whole exhibit. So we'll see what they do with it.
Where is it going to be? Where is the
It's at Kyalami, near Joburg.
oh,
Midrand.
okay. Yeah.
Midrand, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So Yoram, when Kobe Alexander showed his postcards, he kind of got mixed results. As an exhibitor, what can you tell us about his reaction to how he's performed at different shows? I know in Dubai he didn't get perhaps as much praise as he might have hoped for.
Yeah, it's mostly a question of needing to understand what is expected of us. And I think, well, it's fair to say you were one of the jury members in Dubai, and I thought your comments were quite correct. So it's a question of how much text is written, how well the story is done, is it balanced, and so on. And I think the comments were well taken. I can say that for I brought 2 other postcards collection to that exhibition, in Dubai, and I know that at least one of them, your comments were already implemented since then.
Right.
And I think the exhibit is now a lot better.
Oh, that's good. That's good. That's good.
Tim, if I can ask, I think it's fairly trivial what the answer is, but just to verify, let's say I have, shall we say, archival material or postcard, like the original photo, which was then sort of slightly altered to make the final postcard and so on. I assume that's permissible.
Again, if it is actually part of the process of a particular publisher or printer, absolutely. I don't know how they could say it's not applicable.
Yeah, I thought I thought that's the right thing. Okay, good.
You know, I think one of the problems, and picture postcards are going to have that stigma, just like first day covers and just like display division exhibits, and even if you look back 30 years ago, thematic exhibits, there's going to be a stigma on it, and older, more conservative judges are not going to appreciate the material. And I think you have to have, I think juries need to have a mindset that asks a number of questions. And what is it you're trying to do? Does the scope and the storyline make sense? Is it well developed? What do you know about your subject? What is the challenge of the material that you're using for your exhibit? And how well have you done that? All this other biases should, of course, we're talking about humans, but they should not enter the thought process when you're judging an exhibit. Frankly, I think stampless postal history is boring as hell, but it doesn't mean that I ding it because there aren't any pretty little squares on it. And modern, there's a fellow here that does the Masons, and Steve McGill, I give him grief all the time because it's a bunch of modern junk. it's only 40 or 50 years old. I give him grief all the time, and he's won grand awards with it. So it's not that I don't like to judge it. I just like to give him grief. But that is the basis that we're always fighting as exhibitors. We're fighting biases. I would like to think that the younger the judges, or the more modern judges that have, say, less than 10 or 15 years experience, they are being trained, at least here in the States. I hope they're being trained better than that, to leave their personal opinions at home and do what I said. What is it he's trying to do? How will he do it? And reward him for it. Period. I don't care what the exhibit is.
I think, Tim, one of the hardest things as a judge, and you highlighted it very well, is what's rare in a postcard exhibit. You say, well, okay, why is this card rarer than another one? And I think that's one of the hardest categories for a judge to embrace. I mean, presentation is easy, treatment is easy. Well, have they gone into detail? Have they got the deltological knowledge? But then you say, okay, well, what's rare? You stand in front of the frames and you see all these black and white postcards. You see some real photos, and you see some lithography, and you see some printed in Germany, some printed locally. You say, okay, now where's the rarity? What is the rarity? And that I think is the hardest thing for judges to embrace and to wrap their minds around.
I totally agree with that. There's no question about it. And I made that statement when I opened up the rarity, that the exhibitor must aid the judges in this. And they can do that probably in their synopsis. But again, if you're talking about international exhibits, sometimes judges don't even look at synopsis, which I think is an arrogance beyond reproach. But you have to tell the judges that there are certain cards in there, and again, real photos that are probably one-off, interior views, small publishers or printers. You have to tell them this printer only published or printed for 3 years and he went out of business, and he probably didn't produce a whole bunch of stuff. Or this guy out of some small Duckburg, like, a printer in, some small town in Eastern Harrismith. I mean, he's not going to print 100,000 picture postcards. He's going to do the printings of 100 maybe. And what's the survivability of this stuff? So a judge has to open his mind, and the exhibitor has to do the majority of the work to help the judge. That's my take on it.
So how do you indicate the rarity? Only one scene? Do you put a border? What would be your recommendation?
Yes, I would say yes. You can either do, I think in the case, it all depends. It's your personal, whether you put borders, different colored borders, or a border around it. I think pointing fingers or, flashing lights are a little gauche. Or you can use a different font set off down below the card saying only one scene by exhibitor. When you get your bona fides in either the title page, you're saying I've collected this stuff for 40 years, that should alert the judge about something. Or in your synopsis, you say, my experience when I say something, I've never seen one, or I've only this particular series, I've only seen one of each of the cards I have. I mean, it's a rare series of one, because they were very expensive to produce, particularly these glossy cards with multiple colors that are embossed. Those were very difficult and expensive to produce. They didn't do mass production of that like they did the lithography. So a judge that's going to judge picture postcard exhibits, if he doesn't collect picture postcards, he's going to either have to believe what he's being told, or let somebody else tell him what to do. I don't know. I don't know what to say, because somebody who doesn't collect picture postcards isn't going to get it. Because we can do things on postal history and Markoffli exhibits and stamp exhibits when there's somebody's been collecting for 50 years has a census of these covers. This is one of 7 covers recorded. Okay, that's an actual number. How can you say that with postcards? You can't.
Right.
So you have to go by intuitive statements. The challenge factor, and if this is the only one I've seen, I've been collecting this stuff actively for 30 years. I mean, that should say something. What do you think, Terry?
Yeah, no, I agree, because I've also got this problem of how do you indicate it and how do you prove it? You know, you can't prove it.
You can't prove it in postal history either. People just have to take, well, I've been doing the census. Well,
Yeah.
prove it. Show me images of all these. In US, classic US, that's been published. But nobody's published a census of Orange Free State pre-1880.
No.
Yeah. So
I think a lot of it comes down to the credibility of the exhibitor. I mean, that's a factor that I know it's easy to say, well, you should always, and it's interesting, I've heard this said several times in judging, well, you have to accept at face value what the exhibitor tells you. Intuitively, if you know it's wrong, I know some judges don't like their fellow judges to say, hey, listen, this exhibitor's wrong. This is not true. But there's a big advocacy for, well, you accept the truth of what the exhibitor says. And I don't know that that's always very helpful. What do you think, Tim?
Well, I think unless you have something else in your quiver, another arrow in your quiver that can counter that. Well, in your case, you go up and you start looking at something that you've seen in your history of 35, 40 years of looking at all the great collections in the world and seeing things, and somebody says, this is the only one known. You said, well, that's funny, because I've seen 3 of them come up for auction.
All right.
Oops. You want to make sure you're knowing the jury that you're being judged by, but certainly you have to. I think in picture postcards, unless you really, I mean, if somebody's going to exhibit something from Southern Africa in picture postcards, I'm probably going to have a little bit of knowledge, certainly in the Boer republics, maybe not so much in Natal or Cape Colony, but then again, they produce so much more. But somebody's going to do an Egypt postcard exhibit, I'm going to have to go what he says, because I don't know.
So, Tim, thank you.
Well,
it's actually been interesting to hear your perspective, David Figg's perspective, and then during Milcopex, we're going to hear some other perspectives or other points of view, and we'll be able to report to you after Milcopex what was the success of it's albeit not explicit but kind of implicit, a joint postcard and stamp show. I mean, again, you touched on this, the problems of filling frames, the problems of getting dealers. I think all shows have got to start to become a little more creative and a little bit more broad-minded about how to sell tables. I mean, the issue, and it's interesting what you said, because I think without betraying a confidence, Marianne, I think I can say this, the postcard dealers are just not used to paying the price that they might pay for, that a stamp dealer would pay. Obviously, their commodity is cheaper. They don't necessarily have the 4-figure items to sell to recoup their costs. And I don't know how a show can best juggle a group of dealers who are looking for a low-cost table versus a group of traders who are willing to pay a higher price. How do you bring those two together? You know, it's difficult. But I think increasingly it's going to be one that shows are going to have to come to terms with.
We were very lucky here to have a well-established postcard show that had been going on, and they were kind of always looking for venues that they could afford. And this, the fairgrounds out there, I mean, it's halfway to Kansas, and it's not convenient to go to, although we have had good local support of people coming. It's not quite as easy to get to as our old venue, but having them right next door to us, where we have a lot more space to fill. Our space is 15,000 square feet or whatever the number is, and I think they have like 2,000 or 3,000 square feet. So obviously, their costs are going to be much less than ours, and therefore they can do less. But to meld the two together in the same building, in the same parking place, the same parking lot, I think that's a possible answer. But how many places are going to be able to find a venue where that can occur?
Right.
And how do you equitably split the costs and things like that? I don't know. But I look forward, at least. Who were the judges on this? It's Liz
Heisey, Jerry Miller, and Norma.
Okay,
Norma.
Yeah.
Marianne, can you help me? Norma's family name?
Yeah, I know Norma. She did the Lloyd's of London exhibit. I've known her from Canada.
Okay.
For 15 years or so. So she's used to weird and wonderful stuff. So she's not. Jerry's much more of a traditional postal historian, but you know, I think he's a fair judge and he's a good judge. And Liz, of course, has done picture postcard exhibits as well, as that's how she got her start on display. So she's definitely used to the weird and wonderful as well. So it'll be interesting to see how the picture postcard exhibits go, and how well the people who come to the show, and see if you can get some sort of feedback from the audience. And
Right.
If I know they're going to enjoy one exhibit and not mine.
The outhouse.
Yes.
The
Yes.
outhouse.
How did America spell relief? Outhouse. And
Right.
That's a fascinating story, and I love my wife for doing that.
Well, I always remember Pamela telling me when you know, you talk about in-house lawyers, and I remember describing somebody as an outhouse lawyer, and Pamela explained to me that really didn't quite work. That, you know, it was not a nice thing to call somebody as an outhouse lawyer.
Yeah.
You know, Ellie would probably laugh at that one, Yoram. So listen, Tim, I'm going to thank you for your presentation, and Marianne, we've got the thing recorded, and I will send that over. Yoram, nice to see you again, and
Yes,
Terry,
yeah.
Thank you for joining us. Last week we
I've
had
enjoyed it.
fellow South Africans. We had Jamie Smith with us last week. I don't know what happened to Jamie this week.
Yes, I unfortunately missed last week. So is there a recording I can access?
Yeah, you can access the recording at Milcopex, MILCOPEX.org. That's the show website. And the talk last week and this week's will all be on the Milcopex website. And we'll also be recording the talks that are taking place during the show. And those recordings will also be on the show website.
Right.
And if you're really interested, you can find the recordings from prior Milcopexes on the website.
I'll have a look. Thanks.
Yeah. So if you have nothing else to do, there are lots of talks to listen to. So Tim, thank you very much. Marianne, I hope you're enjoying the rest of your Sunday. And Yoram, nice to see you. Happy New Year.
Thank you.
And, Tim, thank you again. And
no, thank you, Colin, for putting this together. People may not know how much and how important you are in the background of a number of shows. You've been a friend of Rompex for the last 15 years, helping us put together seminars and talks and exhibits and getting things together. And hopefully in 25 we can do the Abraham Accord, Yorm, and get that on board here. And Terry Lynn, thank you very much. I know it's getting a little bit past your bedtime, isn't it?
Yes, it's now 9 minutes past 11 at night.
Yeah, I know.
Well, at least you're not having load shedding. That's the usual problem that the South Africans have.
I
Yes.
know. I was supposed to be load shedded now during the talk, but then they dropped the stage to stage 2, so I didn't go off.
Okay.
Oh, that's lucky. That's
Good.
lucky.
Oh,
And where are you from? Where are you, Terry?
I'm in Pretoria.
Oh, you're in Pretoria.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Well,
you're with Adele. You're with Adele,
I am, yes.
so to speak. And but
Yeah. Well,
all right.
I
All right,
say
well,
hello
listen.
to all my friends in Pretoria, between the general and Johan and all the other people that are there in the area. So give them my love, and
I will.
I'd
Thanks.
love to get back there, but I don't know. One of these days I'd like to get back there and judge again, because
Oh, that would be great. Yeah.
I've done it twice, and I loved every minute and every second of it. I just love you South Africans. I even injected my wife. She considers South Africa her second home. We've been there 4 times since we've been
Oh,
married. So,
marvelous.
yeah, we just love it. So, okay. Well, God bless you
Well,
all.
I'm going to stop the recording, and then I will. Or is yours.